Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. We have
I'm not going to resign. I work for the people of the state of New York. They elected me, and I'm going to serve the people of the state of New York.
As you heard there, the governor saying he's not going anywhere amid harassment allegations from 3 different women, and he asked voters to wait for the state attorney general to finish her investigation before judging his actions, though many New Yorkers already have. And the governor got emotional as he spoke about it.
I now understand that I acted in a way that made people feel uncomfortable. It was unintentional, and I truly and deeply apologize for it. I feel awful about it, and frankly, I am embarrassed by it. And that's not easy to say, but that's the truth. I never knew at the time I was making anyone feel uncomfortable. And I certainly never, ever meant to offend anyone or hurt anyone or cause anyone any pain. That is the last thing I would ever want to do.
I want to bring in Andrew Whitman now, senior political correspondent, with the very latest on a moving story.
Yeah, and I don't know if today's briefing is going to change the trajectory of the story for Cuomo, but something needs to, at least from his perspective. As Cuomo deals with these allegations and the scandal over his handling of nursing homes, his support across New York is plunging, according to the latest numbers. A new statewide poll from a local Albany TV station and Emerson College shows Cuomo's approval rating now underwater by 10 points. For the sake of comparison, 7 out of 10 voters approved of the governor when Emerson took a poll last spring. That poll also asked whether or not Cuomo should resign over these allegations. Those numbers pretty evenly split, with roughly a third saying the governor should step down and 1 in 3 saying he should not. One more poll about the allegations. Nearly 4 in 10 New Yorkers believe Cuomo did it. Only 18% say he didn't, with 44% saying they are not sure. Several Democrats are calling for Cuomo to go, but the head of the state's Democratic Party, Jay Jacobs, is defending him. Jacobs issued a statement that says, in part, quote, "It is both premature and unfair for anyone to opine on the outcome until the investigation is completed and the reports reported." This comes as the state attorney general, Letitia James, has opened up an investigation into Cuomo's behavior. This in the wake of a third accuser stepping forward. The first 2 women, Charlotte Bennett and Lindsay Boylan, worked for Cuomo, and they say he sexually harassed them. The third woman, Anna Ruck, never worked for the governor, but she says she met Cuomo at a wedding, and as you see in the photo, he put his hands on her cheeks and asked if he could kiss her. Rich, back to you.
All right, Andrew, thank you. My next guest, he's been covering this story from the very beginning, Jesse McKinley. He's the Albany bureau chief at the New York Times. How much do you think the contrition we heard from Cuomo today quelled, if any, of the outrage?
I think it's too soon to say, but, there's 2 schools of thought. I think on one hand, he did what he needed to do in terms of really falling to his knees and saying, look, I'm terribly sorry. I didn't realize that this was offensive. I made a mistake. I'm embarrassed. A lot of that was probably things that he should have been saying before this. By the same token, he did not address any of the specific allegations. He did not address his apologies by name to his accusers. And in some cases, he said things like, I didn't inappropriately touch anyone, which online, on Twitter, on places like that, was instantly kind of seized upon by people that said, well, in the case of Anna Ruck, you grabbed her face. So I think it's a mixed bag, and I think it'll take, a few hours, a day, or two to see how this actually landed, both with the general public and with lawmakers.
I've been a little surprised how long it took for Cuomo to come out as he did today, and also a little surprised that he thought initially there would have been any scenario where he could have controlled the probe, in effect, and appoint the folks instead of the attorney general taking it over independently. What did that tell you about behind the scenes, how he and his team viewed the allegations?
I think it tells you that Cuomo expected to be able to kind of revert to a playbook that has worked for him before. in other tight spots and other bad scandals that he's had, he's been able to kind of control them. In the Moreland Commission Pro in 2014, he shut that commission down when it got too close to his donors. In the the Prococo corruption scandals of a couple of years ago, he had kind of plausible deniability that he didn't know about Prococo because Prococo was out of the kind of executive chamber payroll at that point. So he's always managed to kind of put a little distance between himself and bad behavior. In this case, however, it was him himself who was accused of the bad behavior, and particularly with Charlotte Bennett, the young woman who I spoke to and we reported on Saturday. He has never denied that he said those things to her regarding her positions on monogamy, whether or not she wanted to sleep with older men or had slept with older men, etc. Those kind of unsavory questions about her sex life. So he hasn't addressed those yet directly, and seems to be banking a lot that the Attorney General's report will absolve him, or at the very least buy him some time until the furor dies down, I suppose.
You know, I saw Senator Cousins, and she and Speaker Hasty would think their support, or at least not joining those calling for him to step down, would be critical. She said if there's inappropriate touching, that in effect would be a bridge too far. What is inappropriate touching here in terms of the line? Holding that young woman's face at a wedding reception? Are we going to figure this out on the fly? Does anyone have an idea where the line is?
I think there's legal precedent for this, but I'm not a lawyer and I can't really wade into that. But I think you do touch on a good point. I think Andrea Stewart-Cousins will be critical going forward. There is a kind of a water cooler theory in Albany right now that if she decides that enough is enough and that the governor needs to resign, that would be a very powerful voice in this debate. She's well respected. She is the leader of a overwhelming Democratic majority in the Senate, which in an impeachment scenario would be the judge and jury for Mr. Cuomo. So if Andrea Stewart-Cousins decides that the governor's actions rise to the level of removal from office, I think that would make it very difficult for him to continue.
Jesse, I want to stay with water cooler for a second. And I used to be around Albany more, and there were scandals, whether it be corruption, whether it be harassment or whatever, that when the details came to light, some of the rumor mill certainly had preceded that for a while. Andrew Cuomo's been in Albany for 2/3 of his life. And I'm more removed than you are, but I hadn't heard any of this. And again, he's in his 60s now. Does it surprise you, or had you heard rumblings like this for years and only now is it coming to fruition? Because it doesn't fit, at least. Nobody said that he was warm and fuzzy and he was famous for the sharp elbows, but I never heard this.
Well, I think that there's certainly been rumors. But of course, those are just rumors. You can't if you can't verify them, they're not news. So I don't think this came completely out of left field, but I think you hit upon something. When you're talking about workplace toxicity, when you're talking about a boss who screams at people and is abrasive in the way that I think most people would agree, it's almost not a matter of debate that Mr. Cuomo can be. I think that it makes people scrutinize your administration. And sometimes what you find when you start to dig around in the kind of inner office activities can be troubling. And I think in this case, Charlotte Bennett had allegedly a very unsettling experience with the governor, and went through the proper channels, spoke to his chief of staff 5 days after this incident. 2 days later, she was transferred. So those sorts of indicators say to me that obviously they took this seriously, and it was troubling enough to them internally to take action. Now, whether or not that is part of a pattern, a trend, we'll see. I think there's a lot of reporters chasing a lot of leads right now.
And finally, past being prologue, and you report on this, As Attorney General, he presided over the probes that led to the resignation of Eliot Spitzer, and certainly you can argue shortchanged David Patterson's tenure in Albany. There is, I don't know if Shakespearean is the right way, but certainly he's not new to how these things work in Albany. It's surprising, however this turns out, that there wasn't at least foreseeability here that something could have been spun out like this by a person who's been around Albany as long as he has.
Well, I think you see that most critically in the way that he initially, after we broke our story on Saturday night, tried to basically set up an investigation outside of the purview of the Attorney General. That was rejected roundly by most people in positions of power in the state. Then he kind of pivoted and said, okay, well, I'll let Tish James be involved, but I'm also going to have the Chief Justice of the Court of Appeals, the highest court in the state, kind of oversee that with Tish. And that was also rejected because that still seemed, that he had his fingers in the pie. So finally, he does have an Attorney General investigation, which, as you point out, is probably not where he wanted this to end up, considering past Attorney Generals, himself included, have really, made problems for governors. And we'll see how fast this investigation proceeds. We'll see what it uncovers. But it is certainly not a comfortable place to be for a governor to have the Attorney General or her subordinates poking around into your personal behavior with subpoena power.
And it's an impossible final question to ask, but the sense, at least from folks I spoke to, is if this is the extent of it, he may survive. And who knows what happens next year, runs or doesn't. But if there's more, it changes the equation and he may not be able to make that choice on his own.
I think it's a fluid situation. I think it's kind of a knife's edge kind of place right now. I think that he is hoping that he can survive this. I think that, if the news cycles continue and more allegations arise, that's going to be a very tough position to hold.
Jesse, I know how swamped you are. I appreciate you making the time for us, so thank you so much.
Of course, guys.
All right, everyone, when we come back, for the first time since the riot at the Capitol, the head of the D.C. National Guard answering questions under oath about why it took so long for the Guard to respond. Well, after the break, you're going to hear what he had to say, and it was some shocking testimony. News from the contentious hearing next.